Hi, I'm Sarah.
And I am Rena, and welcome to
Biopic, a podcast story. This is a podcast where we dissect the good, bad, ugly, and absurd of this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic. If you want to learn more about us, our scoring system, and how we choose movies, please check out our special introductory episode, Introduction. Who are we and what are we doing?
Sarah. What movie are we doing this week?
I'm so angry. This week, we will be talking about Cobb. Rena, can you give us a trigger warning?
This movie, Cobb, starring Tommy Lee Jones, contains depictions of violence, lies, lying liars who lie, more lies, racism, mendacity, false claims, guns. Oh, I already mentioned racism, and in a permutation of violence, as after previously mentioning violence involving guns, violence against women, and attempted non-consensual sex, by which I mean rape. Sarah, did I leave anything out?
I have a trigger warning for Robert Wuhl. Robert Wuhl is in this movie.
So I had not heard of Robert Wuhl until you warned me about him. But when I watched this, he is always doing this mugging expression, this double take that someone at some point told him was classic. But what it really is just this rubber-faced thing where he looks like he belongs in a PG-rated knockoff of Beethoven, the Charles Grodin movie about the dog, not in a prestige drama. But it seems that Robert Wuhl was cast in lots of things when I was not paying much attention to the movies because I was quite young.
Yeah, we had, as a society, Wuhl fever for about 15 years. I don't know what to attribute it to. I can't explain what was happening, but he got a lot of work, and he is often the weakest link in his work. And we're going to have a lot to say about him. But with that, Rena, can you give us the spoiler warning?
Spoiler warning. We are going to spoil everything. Consider yourself warned.
And just to go over some of the sources we used, I think both of us did a lot of research, reading a lot of different articles, but the main source was the book Ty Cobb, A Terrible Beauty by Charles Leerhsen.
Yes, we will be reading from that. Before we get to our main intro, in addition to the 6 points that I'm about to read off, I will also read a brief excerpt from Charles Leerhsen about how he figured out that Al Stump was a big liar. Here are a few outstanding facts that I'd like you to put some pins in. 1. Ty Cobb's mother was 12 when his parents were married, and 15 when she had him. So once again, here comes that bugbear. 3 times in 10 episodes, pregnant children. 2. His parents met when his dad was his mom's school teacher. 3. His mom accidentally shot and killed his dad just before Cobb's major league debut. 4. Al Stump, the author of the book that Cobb was based on, was a big liar. 5. Cobb grossed $1 million on a production budget of $25.5 million in 1994, or almost $54 million in 2024 dollars. And to be fair, you see the money on screen. The production value is very good. The clothes all look accurate, including that they do the little things that don't age very well. Everything looks and feels like you know where the money went. 6. Jimmy Buffett has a cameo as a character called the Armless Guy. With that, Sarah, would you like to give us the intro?
Sure. And before we start, I would like to give this assessment, which is absolutely the result of my college education. This movie is super fucked up. So, Wikipedia, our friends there, have this to say about the film. Cobb is a 1994 American biographical sports drama starring Tommy Lee Jones as Ty Cobb. The film was written and directed by Ron Shelton and based on a 1994 book by Al Stump. So this is an auteur vision. The original music score was composed by Elliot Goldenthal. And as you mentioned, the box office results for this were underwhelming. Tyrus Raymond Cobb was nicknamed the Georgia Peach. He was a professional baseball player. He was a center fielder. He was a native of the rural Narrows, Georgia. He spent 22 seasons in Major League Baseball, playing with the Detroit Tigers. And he finished his career with the Philadelphia Athletics. In 1936, Cobb received the most votes of any player on the inaugural ballot for the National Baseball Hall of Fame, receiving 222 out of 226 votes, which is 98.2%. No other player received a higher percentage of votes until Tom Seaver in 1992. And in 1999, the Sporting News ranked Cobb third on its list of baseball's 100 greatest players. He is widely credited with setting 90 Major League Baseball records during his career. His combined total of 4,065 runs scored and runs batted in after adjusting for home runs is still the highest ever produced by any Major League player. He still holds several records as of the end of the 2022 season, including the highest career batting average. He retained many other records for almost half a century or more. Cobb's legacy includes a large college scholarship fund for Georgia residents, financed by his early investments in Coca-Cola and General Motors. A couple of other things I want to just add here regarding Ty Cobb's, quote, racism. When the league was segregated, Cobb often went to Negro League games after he retired. He would throw out the first ball if asked, and he even sat in the dugouts with players. When Texas was considering integrating its leagues in the late 1940s, Cobb urged them to do so, saying everyone deserved a chance to play. In the 1950s, he said Willie Mays, who we found out moments before starting record, passed today at the age of 93. Safe journeys, sir, was the only player he'd pay to see. And he said Roy Campanella was the player who most reminded him of himself. Was Ty Cobb probably a racist? Yeah, probably in the same way Atticus Finch was a racist. The times dictated a lack of education. I am not excusing anything. I am merely pointing out that he wasn't David Duke with better skills on the baseball diamond. Do I sound like I'm overpraising him? Here's why. I think it's really important that we start by talking about the incredibly problematic source material for this film, which is one piece of shit named Al Stump.
This is Charles Leerhsen on the thing in the writings of the liar Al Stump that made him realize that Stump was a liar. Leerhsen writes, "It was something that occurred in Stump's infamous True Magazine article of late 1961, specifically an anecdote about how Cobb had commissioned a portrait of himself just before his death. Stump's intention in this case was to illustrate Cobb's callousness toward the artist he'd promised to hire for the project, but it had a very different effect on me. I remember wondering why someone who, according to Stump, A, wouldn't part with a penny unless he absolutely had to, and B, couldn't sit up for more than a few minutes at a time because of numerous illnesses, would commission a portrait in oils done from life. Wouldn't posing for a noted Arizona artist, Stump provides no name, both necessitate sitting and result in an unnecessary expense? What ultimately tipped the scales, though, was a quote that Stump used to finish the story. Stump's Cobb, after checking the preliminary sketches and seeing a living corpse with sagging cheeks and a thin neck, supposedly canceled the portrait, telling the artist, "I wouldn't let you recalcimine my toilet." I simply didn't believe that any human being ever said, "I wouldn't let you recalcimine my toilet." If one thing is a lie, how much else is? I decided to do a little random fact-checking. starting with the weather in Royston on December 24th, 1960, the day Stump said he went to Rose Hill Cemetery with Cobb. It turned out that it didn't snow that day in Royston or for hundreds of miles around, not even lightly. It was one tiny thread, but when I tugged it, Stump's oeuvre unraveled. And the final chapter in Leerhsen, where he writes about what a big liar Al Stump was, is definitely worth reading, even if, like me, you have zero interest whatsoever in sports ball. I respect, though, that Ty Cobb is a man who retired almost a century ago and has so many unbroken records. I have to respect being that good at something. Based on what I learned about Ty Cobb and Al Stump's shameful journalism, I rapidly developed the suspicion that I would conclude that Field of Dreams is arguably a better and more honest biopic about shoeless Joe Jackson than Cobb is as a biopic about Ty Cobb. But I have a predilection for hyperbole, so I thought that I had best admit that advance assumption up front and let you reach your own conclusions. Being lied to is boring. Great art resonates with us because it tells a fundamental aesthetic truth about the human condition, even when it is fictional. But when the creator knowingly starts with a lie, they're wasting your time. Everyone involved in Cobb unwittingly allowed Al Stump to waste their time.
That's incredibly generous for you to say unwittingly. So I want to ding, and I want to say more than ding. I want to slam director and writer Ron Shelton here too, because one of the anecdotes that was shared by Leerhsen was, when he contacted Ron Shelton concerning the inaccuracies, Shelton refused to provide documentation for some of the more extravagant aspects of the movie and admitted to fabricating scenes along with Al because they believed it was something the real Cobb could have plausibly done in real life. This is, to me, like, what does that even mean? Like, this to me is so fucking irresponsible. Excuse my language. This is reprehensible. Don't make art anymore if you think it's okay in this context in which the film presents this, which is essentially a cisgender male's mommy dearest. It's not okay. Ty Cobb was obviously not a 100% great dude, since his children wouldn't talk to him, or at least that's something that Al Stump and Ron Shelton thought was plausible, because I don't even know what's true or what's not true in this movie.
So let's differentiate, if we can, between the type of lying that goes on here and what we discussed under our rules about storytelling versus accuracy, where things may be glossed over or adjusted for flow. What is the crucial difference that has us up in arms at the liar Al Stump versus other times when we'll say, well, yeah, it makes sense that they didn't show that Loretta Lynn actually did go back and visit her parents a few times, or if they cut the number of children that Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette had in the Coppola film. What's the difference there, Sarah?
The difference to me is that the two examples you just gave are in service of keeping the narrative in motion, where these are all lies that are used to drive the narrative forward. It's creating events out of whole cloth to serve a narrative purpose behind what Al Stump wants to present about Ty Cobb. I think that there's a difference between Jesus playing with dinosaurs and Jesus having 12 apostles instead of 30. Like, to me, it's unforgivable treason against your character that's presenting a really negative version of him that he's, first of all, not alive to defend. It is presenting him as a person that he wasn't. Like, just make a movie about a fake character if you want to make up a bunch of stuff about someone.
When I look at Al Stump as a journalist, when I went into media, I still have this idealistic nostalgia in my heart for a time where the image of the journalist was the heroic Woodward and Bernstein bringing down the evil Nixon administration. That's how I wish everyone saw journalists as an ideal. So putting Al Stump against that, of course I hate the guy. And of course he's what a segment of the population assumes all journalists are.
This is all fiction, and he's presenting it like it's true. It's unforgivable.
Al Stump lied to make himself look cool.
I, like you, I am not a person who cares that much about baseball, but I felt about halfway through this, just knowing what I knew about Stump and also meeting him as a character, which put a pin in that, feeling like I needed to defend Ty Cobb. And didn't think I'd get there at any point. But here we are.
Yeah, I don't care much about sports ball unless it's the Super Bowl or a Philadelphia team is advancing in the playoffs. And yes, one of the biggest problems with Cobb is that it is based on the lies told by Al Stump, the writer who unfortunately happens to be the second major character who we have to pay attention to. When I started reading Ty Cobb, A Terrible Beauty by Charles Leerhsen, the first thing that I did was to run a text search for mentions of Al Stump to learn about the lies. And there are cases where journalists wind up being wrong, where I can forgive them. For example, I can forgive Randy Schultz for being wrong about Patient Zero in And the Band Played On, because Randy Schultz thought he was right, and I still heartily recommend And the Band Played On. But Al Stump lied knowingly. I'm not sure if he did this to get back at Ty Cobb for being horrible to work with, or to get notoriety for telling a good yarn, but he committed two major violations of journalism ethics. Firstly, that he lied, and secondly, that he allowed his personal feelings toward his subject to get in the way of telling the truth. Ergo, Al Stump was a garbage journalist, and Cobb is based on garbage journalism.
Also worth noting is that Stump's son defends his father full-throatedly by saying, how could it possibly have benefited my father to make up these lies? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm watching a movie called Cobb that's based on your dad's work. Maybe that's something. Al Stump clearly did not suffer from a low opinion of himself, as we will hear throughout this film. But with all that up front, should we get started on talking about the movie itself?
Yup.
I when I started watching this, I was like, this is a feel bad movie. It can also be classified as a, hey, would you look at this asshole for 2 hours movie? We had so many of these in the 90s, these joyless anti-hero movies like this, Hoffa, Mr. Saturday Night, The Babe, Falling Down. Just, we hear a monstrous human share their thoughts and alienate everyone in their life and then die kind of movies. There were just so many of them. And I spent so much of this film trying to consider how or if it was possible to save this film and make it something good. Because after it introduces us to Ty Cobb through a newsreel, it opens on an impenetrable conversation between a bunch of assholes about sports, intercut with Robert Wuhl, who, to be charitable, is horrifically miscast and not up to the responsibilities of this role prima facie, and certainly is not in a position to play the contrasts and complexities of a man who is a piece of shit walking to this bar where this conversation is taking place. Like, he's basically like the late 80s, early 90s Rob Schneider. Like, everyone treated him like a serious person for a little while, and I don't understand why. He has two settings, loudly smug and I'm a douche cat butt mouth. And to me, this was a film ruining miscast. part of my reconsideration of what could be salvageable here was who could have played this role and could have been a good foil for Tommy Lee Jones, who is really ferocious and mostly excellent in this movie, although sometimes he's like a little bit Yosemite Sam with the gun. And I was thinking if they could have gotten Tom Hanks, Gary Sinise, Bill Paxton, Michael Keaton, also the dog from Air Bud, because all of these two-hander scenes, and there's about 6,000 of them between Wuhl and Tommy Lee Jones. Like, Wuhl is so outmatched. And because, as I said, he has two settings, they feel very repetitive. They do not move forward. They do not show progression of his character in any way. Just like there were other actors. I don't know why he's here. Other people could have been cast in this movie. The dog from Air Bud, the cryogenic head of Walt Disney, anything, like give me anything. Besides this performance, he is not up to the challenge. Within the first 10 minutes, I am preparing a full-throated defense of Ty Cobb of the film, who's not great. The upfront pretend newsreel points out that Cobb was involved in a gambling scandal in 1926 and was ultimately acquitted, and that the children of America viewed him as a hero, which is confusing given how much everyone else hates him. And demonstrates some complexity, and no children anywhere in America would like Al Stump. Angry. I'm so angry.
I'm worried that the audio is going to be like garbled from me laughing so hard while you're talking.
It's okay.
But,
I think I sound like a monster again, but seriously, here I am just thinking, that Ty Cobb has a point about not liking you, Al Stump. You're the worst.
So Tommy Lee Jones delivers a performance that there were moments where he almost got me to start thinking of Cobb as an irascible old scamp before he'd shoot at something or say something terribly racist and remind us that we shouldn't like this guy. But he's having a fantastic time here, I think, and he's giving a performance that is charismatic in spite of itself in a way that's intentional. It is also an Oscar-batory performance. It is straight up Oscar baiting.
Yeah, he's Oscar baiting all over the furniture. So we're hearing in voiceover Al Stump talking about how Cobb is kind of a miserable dude, and he's gotten this call about how Ty Cobb wants him to write about him. Stump comes upon the house and he's hearing all this ruckus. There's throwing things, there's shooting things. Willie, who is the housekeeper / butler, he's a black man, says as Stump arrives, he hears him saying to Cobb, "Die before the sun comes up and rot in hell," which I kind of love.
Spoiler warning, I have no choice dialogue for Cobb except anything that Willie says. And Willie, who demonstrates that he has more common sense and self-respect than Al Stump. My immediate thought was, I want to watch an anti-driving Miss Daisy about Willie versus Cobb. Put a pin in that.
So Willie pieces out, and Al climbs up the stairs and sees Cobb just chilling on his bed, drunk, shooting at stuff with his dog. And he's at a 9 here, and 9 is pretty much where he stays throughout this film. Occasionally it goes up to 10. But he's on fire. And then Ty Cobb is starting to dictate the story to Stump. He's going to treat him like a scribe, which goes over about as well as you can expect from a man who holds himself to the level of high regard that Stump does. And he quotes Robert E. Lee, and I'm so irritated by Stump that I'm like, all right, Robert E. Lee, Ty Cobb, awesome.
Wait, I'm enjoying watching the guy who is waving a gun around, quoting the leader of the Confederacy and not rooting for the coastal journalist. Something is very wrong here. There's some quote that Cobb wants Stump to start the book with about today dies a prince among men or something.
So Ty Cobb wants to go to Reno because he's horny, and they drive off so recklessly. And first they wreck Ty Cobb's car, and then they're both in Robert Wuhl's car driving down a hill. I'm not going to belabor this. It just goes on and on. And they come upon Willie the butler from earlier, and you really see how bad Robert Wuhl is in this moment, because for like 2 minutes when Willie re-enters the film, this movie comes back to life as you see two actors acting with each other.
Remember when I said that I wished that this movie was an anti-driving Miss Daisy about Cobb and Willie the butler? You get that for a few minutes here, because Al Stump won't hold a gun to Ty Cobb's head to force him to drive, but he will give the gun to Willie, who holds the gun to Ty Cobb's head, and then Stump starts asking Willie all kinds of questions about who are the greatest ball players, and Willie is naming Willie Mays, Jackie Robinson, Satchel Paige, and he keeps naming black ball players because he has a gun. And this scene is fantastic. It's the anti-driving Miss Daisy, and I loved it.
I wanna unpack the flashback after this, so I just am going to mention that this very brief performance by an actor named Lou Myers is fantastic. He's a character actor. He worked consistently in small roles across his career. He was on A Different World. He was on The Cosby Show. He did a lot of stage work. And he walks out of this scene by saying, "You should leave this disgusting, wretched, sorry son of a motherfucker immediately." And it just like very briefly, a great performance in a great moment. So we also finally start to get to understanding a little bit more about Ty Cobb's backstory. He starts kind of unpacking it a bit for Al Stump in flashback. He talks about his childhood, as you mentioned, really wholesome backstory involving his dad marrying his mom when she was 12, because that's, as he says, the way they used to do it, which cool. We see Ty get baptized, and then he and his friends engage in the pastime of throwing rocks off a bridge, and a train comes, and Ty stands in front of the train because he feels like he is a child of God or something, and jumps off the bridge at the last minute. He's a boundary pusher.
So here I have to give this film slight credit for, I thought one of his friends was going to get run over by the train, and it was going to be, oh no, childhood trauma, watched someone die, check. But it was him who did not get hit by the train, and instead he jumped into the water. He falls about 30 feet or so, and I thought, oh, nice inversion. Did not see that coming.
We go into how his mom murdered his father. She was maybe cheating on his dad.
But here you had some notes about the phenomena known as Kayfabe.
Yes. So we're 30 minutes into this movie before we see any baseball played, which is really something for a movie about baseball and baseball players, about one of the greatest players of the game. And what I kind of thought as we're watching this, like we see how, he's kind of gangster in the way he plays. He's a violent player. They point out that, so many of the other players also embodied characters. They were clowns, they were funny, and he came in and he was a villain. Rena, do you know about kayfabe?
I don't watch professional wrestling.
It is the portrayal of staged events within the wrestling industry that are portrayed as real or true, specifically the portrayal of competition, of rivalries, of relationships between participants. So it's a code word now for maintaining this reality in the direct or indirect presence of the general public. So there's different kinds of characters, and it's all about kind of keeping that narrative fiction of wrestling alive. And to me, as soon as Cobb walked out and was this villain, I was like, oh, he's a heel. It's kayfabe. Heels are villainous or antagonistic characters in the sport and in that kayfabe universe. Their personalities are crafted to elicit a negative response from the audience, and they embrace traditionally negative traits like narcissism, egomania, rage, sadism, bitterness, etc. And it seems like Cobb decided to embrace this persona. He's an excellent player who relishes in being a shit and plays dirty. That was my takeaway, is that was how he enjoyed the sport. It's a really interesting, bold choice to have only, like, this is the only real scene of baseball we see in this entire movie. And a different director working with a script that is not based on petulant lies from a small man could probably have pulled off this way of doing things, because it really shows you everything you need to know about the way Cobb played the game. But this movie doesn't pull that off for a few reasons. First, it's a film from Ron Shelton. He's not good at movies most of the time. Second, every fucking frame of this movie has Robert Wuhl on it, and we're hearing about Cobb from his supposedly morally superior POV rather than actually unpacking this character and why Cobb loves being bad so much. And ultimately, I wish they hadn't done this, because every time Robert Wuhl is not engaged in like this mano a mano with Tommy Lee Jones, this movie becomes 1,000,000,000% better. And you see how effective Tommy Lee Jones is in this scene, and you really like get everything you need. And if I'm adjudicating this film on a straightforward level, this doesn't work because of these reasons. And then on the meta level, where I'm taking into consideration what a piece of shit Al Stump is, it doesn't work, because why am I watching this guy do anything when I could be watching Ty Cobb play baseball? We could be seeing him change the game the way he changed the game. We could see his rivalry with Babe Ruth. I mean, come on. I'm furious. This just could be so much more interesting. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. It's okay. I love you, Sarah. I found Tommy Lee Jones's performance to be charismatic, like quite against my will, as I said. And there are times where I almost feel sorry for him as this lonely, sad old man. Like, there are moments where he's kind of the Ebenezer Scrooge of baseball.
So they get to Reno by the skin of their teeth. They go to a hotel and they run into Lolita Davidovich in a hideous wig. At this point, like for the first of about 100 times, Cobb comes across Stump's notes about what he's seeing and hearing, and he's really unhappy. And we see Stump call his editor and find out that Ty Cobb has final approval over the book, which is not a thing we want to happen when we're doing journalism. And then we go into a club and we see Louis Prima and Keely Smith performing, and this was really good casting. They looked so good. And here's where I was like, oh, this is like Scent of a Woman, you know, this is like a charismatic old coot wandering around, charming people. He's dancing. And then, though, he gets up and he says a bunch of racist stuff and anti-Semitic stuff about the Harlem Globetrotter. And you're like, oh, maybe not. Stump and Ramona, the woman played by Lolita Davidovich, chat. I don't care. We see Ty Cobb try to maybe rape Ramona, and it's awful. And I'm also wondering if this is one of those things that just seemed like something that Ty Cobb might do, or if this is a thing that really happened. Stump decides he's going to write the book that Cobb wants, and also write the truth concurrently, which seems really exhausting. So we're at the Baseball Hall of Fame, which is just as exciting as I remember it from when I was a child. And they show us the same footage from the beginning of the movie, and I was like, how dare you, movie, show me this stupid footage again? But then Cobb keeps seeing interjections of himself in the newsreel footage from what is, according to Al Stump, his real life. Him beating his wife, the gambling scandals, that time he maybe killed a man, all stuff where I'm wondering, like, did this all happen? Is this all just stuff that they felt like maybe Ty Cobb would have done?
With this footage, it seems like he's hallucinating the truth about it, but since this is the truth according to Al Stump, we're being lied to, so it's just a waste of time. Is he losing his mind now? Because he doesn't really show signs of dementia. He's just in pain and drunk. There's evidence that it was basically impossible for him to have committed the murder that he is alleged to have said that he committed. It's all very muddy, and we know that we're being lied to.
This is where this movie veers into being like completely reprehensible. Is just presenting him as a murderer as fact in this film is like what, you know, it serves a narrative purpose. It certainly doesn't serve like seeking out the truth or understanding what kind of person Ty Cobb actually was. It's infuriating. And they get drunk. They try to go to a party where the other players are. And, you know, here's the thing. He's a really miserable drunk. And I don't think I'd allow him into my party either, for the same reasons that I also would not let Andy Warhol into my cocaine party. He's a strong flavor to add to your event, and he's kind of grouchy, particularly as presented by this film. And then they drive to Georgia. We're on the road again, where Ty Cobb wants to go see his daughter, and she refuses him. And they have another fight, you know, like Stump's like, I had to lie to you, and Cobb gives him nothing, and he's a big baby about everything, and he says, I wish you'd die again. He says, I wish you'd die so many times in this movie, and it's really shitty. Then they go to the graveyard where Ty Cobb's mother and father are buried, and they have another fight, and then they have a scene that would have been effective had it been played by an actor, where a process server shows up who's been chasing Robert Wuhl around the country to serve him with divorce papers.
Yes, we have a baby Bradley Whitford sighting. And I noticed that Bradley Whitford is billed quite high up in the opening credits, so I spent the whole movie waiting for him, but he shows up for one scene as a character called Process Server. And Billy Madison was around this time. I don't know how Bradley Whitford is so highly billed for one scene in a character called Process Server when he's not that famous yet, but he's a delight when he shows up. And then there's this thing that if they had a good actor playing Al Stump, it could have been effective, where it's like Stump turns into Cobb and he's firing everywhere with the gun. Like he has learned some bad daddy lessons over the course of this male bonding road trip.
But it's Robert Wuhl, and it reads as comedy that's not funny. And Bradley Whitford conveys so much more in his single scene as process server than Wuhl has done in his entire career. Oh. Stump gets really drunk and passes out, and Cobb finds the notes to the mean book and gets really upset.
Yeah, of course, maybe the mean notes were Stump lying, and that's why he's upset. But we're being told that Stump's lies are the truth. So my head is in a pretzel, and I don't care enough to untangle it. And then Cobb starts coughing up blood, and TLJ has an amazing scene where he finds the humanity in the character because he's aware that he's coughing up blood, and he says, so this is what it looks like. So this is what it feels like as a human being confronted with death, and instead of waking Stump up and yelling at him, he pulls himself together with whatever dignity he can muster, walks to the phone, and then he does this thing where he holds a towel over his mouth while he's calling Emory Hospital, I guess so that he won't mess up the phone by coughing blood into it, and then asks for the ambulance. And it's really fine acting work that he finds the dignity and humanity of a horrible person pulling himself together to face death.
So Wuhl wakes up and he's all oopsie daisy. He sees blood on the walls and his notes all over the floor. And he goes to the hospital where Cobb is, assaulting all the hospital staff, which is based on other accounts completely not true. But he's also kind of being charming, like in that way. He's irascible. He's just like a grumpy old man. It's a very Walter Matthau moment, except he's got a gun and he's shooting at the ceiling. Cobb tells him, fuck off, you won. You get to tell the story you want. And Stump's all, I don't know which version of the story I'm going to tell. And then he's kind of like, I hope you'll die again, I think. He just keeps saying that. It's so shitty.
Yeah, and there's this guy who turns up at the bedside who we saw at the beginning and forgot about, who's like his stockbroker, because he's still interested in buying and selling stocks. And Ty Cobb really had a head for business. And one of the things I found myself thinking at the beginning was Cobb owned all this real estate. He bought stock in Coca-Cola before World War I and was on their board. And I thought, what a shame that this miserable human being was so rich and knew how to make money into money. And poor Jesse Owens came back from the Olympics and had to run against horses and work some miserable day job.
I mean, at least Ty Cobb gave money back to the state to provide educational scholarships. But yeah, it's not fair.
And it talked about how his dad was a state senator and his grandfather was someone that Robert E. Lee would have spoken over. And it reminded me how if you're born above the 90th percentile in America and your family's been securely above that percentile for at least a couple generations, you reach adulthood with a small handbook's worth of knowledge on how generational wealth is preserved and accrued in America, where you have to screw up really badly and there will still be safety nets to come get you a few times.
Did we mention this is our 4th of July movie? What's more American than everything you just talked about?
Yes, this is our 4th of July episode, and Roberto Clemente, a true American hero, who maybe he hasn't had a movie made about him because he spoke Spanish during winning the World Series, does not yet have a biopic.
Soon he will.
It's taken 50 years to get a Clemente pick.
I mean, it took us 34 years to get this piece of shit.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of a case in point. It only took 3 decades to get a movie about this piece of shit based on a story told about another piece of shit and by a piece of shit, and Clemente spends half a century in development hell.
Valid point. Another fine message for our 4th of July episode. On that note, here we are. He finally dies per Al Stump's wishes.
So he's back with his schlumpy journalist friends, and they ask him, what was Cobb like? What was Cobb like? And he says, he was a prince among men, or like a great prince among men has fallen. Whatever that line was that Cobb gave him at the beginning. So nobody learned anything.
What an exercise in futility. All of this. On that note, should we do some scoring?
Yeah, but now I want to play a game where I name actors from the late 80s and early 90s. and have you tell me if they would have done a better job than Robert Wuhl, and how so.
Okay, do it. Let's do it.
Judd Nelson.
He would have been more confrontational in a more actorly way. Oh, I mean, he's a better actor. It wouldn't have been good, but it would have been better. It would have been one note in a very different way. It would have been like he would have been a lot like trying to out yell Tommy Lee Jones, which would have been a lot of movie.
Emilio Estevez.
Better, definitely. His height, the height contrast would have been really something to take in, because Tommy Lee Jones looks like he's about 7 feet tall. And Emilio Estevez is very, very petite. So that would have been interesting to see. And I think he would have brought a different level of earnestness to it, but he wouldn't have been able to deliver on the bravado. But better.
Thomas F. Wilson.
Oh, better, 100%. Period. Biff Tannen versus Ty Cobb, 100%. Amazing movie.
Rick Moranis.
Rick Moranis makes everything better. It would have been weird, but he would have been amazing.
Kirk Cameron.
Oh, come on. Kirk Cameron? Oh God. I mean, I don't think he would have been able to handle the swear words, because this was at the point where Kirk Cameron had transitioned into Left Behind guy. So I don't know how, like, when I think about the shooting of that movie, like, would they have had to do everything in like one shots with each other, because Kirk Cameron wouldn't be able to sit on the set at the same time as Tommy Lee Jones talking about his pecker not going up for 2 years. Like, because he thought growing pains was too suggestive. Interesting movie.
Okay. C. Thomas Howell.
Is he in blackface? Is he dressed up as Soul Man?
I mean, that would be a problem, because this version of Cobb would shoot at him and then there'd be no movie.
It's true.
All right. Can you tell me any more people who unpredictably you think could have done a better job in this movie than Robert Wuhl? Because otherwise we'll go to scoring.
The cat from Homeward Bound.
Okay. Let's go.
Okay. Outward appearances. I gave this a 5. I did, and most of this is credit to Tommy Lee Jones. I thought he looked convincingly old. Particularly given the constraints of the time period when it came to aging makeup, it could look really cartoony. And they did a great job making him look convincingly old. And also the Louis Prima and Keely Smith stand-ins were amazing.
I gave it a 3.5 for outward appearances, and the 3.5 was for that they did a fantastic job making a 50-something man look like an unhealthy 72-year-old man, but nobody looked like who they were supposed to be playing. For acting and casting, what did you give?
I gave it a 5, and again, all in the backs of Tommy Lee Jones and Lou Myers and Bradley Whitford. Tommy Lee Jones is, as I said, like, mostly outstanding in this movie, but the casting of Robert Wuhl is a war crime. It kills this movie from the jump.
So I gave it a 6.5 for acting and casting, because Wuhl was bad, but Lou Myers crackles. Tommy Lee Jones is great in this. I didn't think Lolita Davidovich did such a bad job. Bradley Whitford was fun. I thought anyone in this film who was not Robert Wuhl did a between 7 and 9 performance, and 6.5 was about fair for the average of everybody else minus Robert Wuhl.
Passage of Time, I gave a 5. I thought the old stuff looked convincingly old, but for the most part, there was, it was a road trip that wouldn't end. And while Tommy Lee Jones doesn't look that much like Ty Cobb. I thought that they did a good job, particularly for the time period, of sort of integrating Ty Cobb with Tommy Lee Jones in the footage. And also the child actor who played Baby Cobb was really effective in his scenes.
I gave a 7 because I knew they're on the road for a few weeks. It does seem like a few weeks. The amount of time that is shown passing resembles what is said to have passed. And in the flashback scenes, I knew when they were. The cues from the costumes were excellent.
Costuming, I gave a 7.
So I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm being the nice one today. I gave costuming an 8.5 because everything looked good it looked authentic to the time it was supposed to be. It looked good for what it was. It looked like something the character would wear. The stuff from the 40s also looked right, including like the schlumpy things the journalists are wearing. And the little notes they got right about showing things that aren't necessarily the most fabulous thing you'd remember from a decade, like that stupid little round collar that Tommy Lee Jones is wearing in one of the gambling scenes, where that men used to have these detachable collars, but that round shape just looked dumb on everyone, but they put that in anyway because it was what a man like him might have worn in that era. I thought about the things that I'll deduct for on costumes, and I thought, no, the ones that were supposed to be in the 20s for this looked better than the 1920s costumes in Bessie. The material looked like authentic natural fibers, and I know I'm putting a lot out there in defending this decision, but biopics are judged separately on things looking right for a time period in a way that doesn't hurt other sorts of films. So 8.5.
I don't think that that's unfair at all. All of these movies, what we're finding out is that they're all mixed bags in terms of the elements that go into them. And some elements of this, like, I don't think that it's an all bad movie. This is not Caligula. This is something else. That said, getting to the quality of the script, 2.
I gave it a 4.
Okay, that's fair too. Accuracy, I gave it a 1.
Me too. I gave it a 1 for accuracy. There were people named Ty Cobb and Al Stump. Are there more facts that are right in here than there were in The Conqueror or Caligula? Probably. But the problem is that you're going through a who stole the cookie from the cookie jar of lying, and then the next iteration out is lying.
I don't know what source material The Conqueror used. It seemed like they maybe like someone told the writer of that movie the story of Genghis Khan like in a bar one night. But at least Caligula, we know that they tried to be accurate. Like this movie springs from a poison well. Storytelling, was it cliched, interesting, inventive? I gave this a 3. Like, there's some interesting swings, like the compactness of what we saw in terms of baseball play that were interesting, didn't hold together because of all of the other shortcomings.
Yes, for storytelling, I also gave it a 3. There were points that worked really well, like that Willie shows up 3 times, and that in the final one, Lolita Davidovich smooches him, but that in between there is that anti-driving Miss Daisy that just made me fist pump. And that when you thought that a child was about to get brutally murdered, being run over by a train, that was not what happened. It kind of turned that trope on its head. So it showed some points of originality, but it also was an exercise in just one thing after another that you couldn't trust.
Production value, I gave it a 5. I felt like we did see the money on the screen in a lot of cases, but also some of the scenes felt really small in terms of like the number of people in them. I wasn't blown away by the production value, but it didn't offend me. Hence 5.
Oh, crud, Sarah. I gave it an 8 for production value. This could be the biggest point split we've ever had. The cars looked right. The costuming looked right. The scenery looked right. The motel was dingy. He's not always staying at the fanciest hotel. All of the things looked right for what they were supposed to be. The houses looked right. Nothing looked cheap or inauthentic. And also, they're supposed to be in Reno, not Vegas.
I'm really damaged by my overpraising of Caligula and Queen Latifah. Also, I clearly am angry at this movie. Production and direction decision making, I gave this a 2 because Robert Wuhl murders this movie from the jump. I'm making a hard line against the casting decisions here and how I think it undermined the entire cause of this. And then add on top of that, their source material was based on lies.
Okay, you're gonna hate me for this. I gave it a 4 because I was trying to take a more holistic look at all of the decisions being made, with the exception of Robert Wuhl. They did a reasonably decent job, even a good one, on a number of aspects that were not Robert Wuhl.
Do we care? I gave it a 4. I ended up, because of the quality of Tommy Lee Jones's work in this movie, I cared far more than I thought I would about Ty Cobb. And I felt really sorry for the Ty Cobb they presented me, even though he was kind of a monster. Like, I don't try and reserve a whole lot of sympathy for rich white dudes, but also I'm angry about being deceived into thinking that this was the real Ty Cobb, and so I'm pissed off about that too.
For Do We Care, I gave it a 1. It's a circle of disingenuous garbage people wasting my time by lying to me.
That also works. What was your average?
4.6.
I came to a 3.9.
There are good performances in this.
Yeah.
There are much better performances in this than there were in Gia, and there are higher production values. It is a complicated thing that could be interesting if you can watch it in a context where you aren't paying for it, to see what sorts of trash fires can sometimes happen when you're making a movie.
Not everyone here deserves to be punished for the fact that the source material was rotten. That isn't the costume designer's fault.
No.
That's not the production manager's fault. There's a lot of things about this movie that are not terrible. It's just the well that this is drawn from is so poison, and I'm really I'm disappointed in them for not doing a better job researching it and for depending on one man's word on it. And I wonder if they knew and didn't care or didn't know. I'm curious about what led to the decisions that were made. And, as my mother would say, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. And that's kind of where I leave it. Because it does feel like, in the light of day in the year of our Lord 2024, this is a straight up character assassination.
Did you have any choice dialogue?
I liked very much the moment of "you should leave this disgusting, wretched, sorry son of a motherfucker immediately." I liked that. That was a well-delivered line.
Yeah, this movie doesn't really have any choice dialogue for me, except if Willie says it. And if you hated driving Miss Daisy, honestly, I know it's the third or the fourth time I've said this, that car scene is a hoot. We have some suggestions about things that you may want to watch instead of Cobb. Also, things you should definitely read instead of Al Stump. So, if you're looking for a great movie about baseball, please watch 42 instead. Chadwick Boseman and Harrison Ford are excellent in it. I can't get enough of Chadwick Boseman, rest in peace. And it's also a fine film to watch if you want to see Harrison Ford really acting and losing himself in a character as opposed to getting paid to show up and be what we expect from Harrison Ford. If you want to read some baseball writing by good writers and responsible journalists who are definitely not Al Stump, I would recommend Roger Angle, who is considered the dean of American baseball writing. He died at the age of 101 in 2022. I'd also like to plug Streak, Joe DiMaggio in the Summer of 41 by one of my three favorite college professors, Michael Seidel. Joe DiMaggio personally called him to tell him that he liked the book, and DiMaggio was, I believe, less of an asshole than Ty Cobb. And also, this could be controversial given the states where most of our listeners are. George Will, whose enthusiasm about baseball almost makes me care about the sport. I disagree with George Will's politics about 85% of the time, but he is a master of the English language. You can feel his love for the language in every paragraph, and anyone can become a better writer by reading him.
Awesome. I would also recommend Field of Dreams. That movie, of course, has an absolutely haunting portrayal of Shoeless Joe Jackson by Ray Liotta. And also, if you like a cranky old man, an amazing performance by James Earl Jones. So you get all of the things you get in Cobb without the wool. I am also going to recommend Michael Stolberg anything, any chance I get. I would recommend watching Boardwalk Empire because in that he plays Arnold Rothstein, who fixed the 1919 World Series, which is, of course, the Shoeless Joe Jackson downfall tale. And also, if you want a movie about baseball, I would also recommend Major League. Major League is the best movie ever made about baseball. I am not taking arguments on that. It is a delight. Happy America, everybody. I think we covered off all the critical themes that everyone loves about America in this episode. Lying, shitty journalism, rich people staying rich, unfairness, heels. We got it all here.
Nonetheless, next year, I want to do 1776 for 4th of July. They rhyme Connecticut with predicate.
They did that for you, didn't they?
They did. Where Sherman sings, I can't tell a participle from a predicate. I am just a simple cobbler from Connecticut.
They did that for you. And with that, if you like this show, please leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And tell a friend, or better yet, plural friends, and share us on social media. We hear it helps.
Tune in next week when we'll be talking about Evita.
This will be fun for everyone.
Indeed. Have a splendid week, everybody.
Yes. Thank you, everyone, for joining.